an original.
From Story Studio Network.
Well, how was your night before the morning after? That was insane, wasn't it? Holy cow. I was out in an event last night, hosting an event. And one eye on the Twitter feed. About 8:30 or so, looked down. Man, Tampa's up 2-0. By the time I got into the car, it was the beginning of the third period, and it was already 3-1. By the time I got home, 4-1. I thought, oh, well, there you go, right? We were into the third period at 4-1. And I thought, well, what the hell? Just flip the TV on, cleaned up a couple of emails, got stuff sort of wrapped up for the day. Still 4-1. Went in there and, oh, look at that. 10 minutes left in the third period, and Tampa Bay still hanging on to that 3-goal lead. Heard Joe Bowen in the car when I was coming home saying, well, they're going to have to score 3. It's not that they haven't done that before in this series in a period. No. But Joe making the point, the performance, the compete level, I think is the way Joe put it, has to improve measurably based on the performance that you saw in the first 2 periods of the hockey game. And of course, I hadn't seen any of it because I was busy. But I trust Joe. So I'm looking up thinking, okay, sort of looks like a middling game, and away we go. Flipping through some social media, 10:52 left in the third period. And within seconds, bang, Austin Matthews scores, makes it 4-2. Holy cats. Shortly thereafter, he just does it again. Boom, it's 4-3. And all of a sudden, you looked at the body language of these guys on the ice, and they were believers. Ted Lasso had nothing on them. Nope. And, of course, they tie it up, and then they win it in overtime. So, if you're a Leaf fan, this is an incredible level of excitement. But that was the 4-1, lead disappearing with 10 minutes to go in the playoff game. And it wasn't us this time. So, Game 5, Thursday night. It will be, I don't know, shit or go blind. I'm not quite sure how Leaf fans are going to manage or handle that. And it's just been, great first. It's always like this, right? First series of the Stanley Cup playoffs, if you're a hockey fan, is just the best hockey ever. Because there's drama, there's stories, there's injuries, there's whatever. There's upsets. And with few exceptions, all of these series are highly competitive. So, and I'm just watching. I can see the video here of the Devils and the Rangers playing last night in New Jersey. That's a great series. So, David Schultz is going to join us in the program. We'll talk about a few political developments south of the border. Originally, I just wanted to talk to him about what was going on with the Supreme Court, but there's this, apparently somebody's declared that they're going to run again for president. So we'll get into that with David Schultz on the way. Dave Trafford here with you. It's Now and Next for Story Studio Network. Tuesday, April the 25th. And so a lot of oxygen taken up, but rightly so. It's just good to see how folks are responding. But I have a feeling if the Leafs win this first series, and I'm big I'm not, I've been there, done that, as have you all. It's going to be a little bit like the dog chasing the car, right? Like, what the hell does the dog do once he catches the car? Oh no, now what? We got to do this again? We aren't in postseason conditioning. We're used to going 7 games and that's it, if that. Oh, if we have to play like at 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, away we go. 14? Huh. I don't know. My heart and the rest of me can handle it. Anyway, for those of you who are celebrating, I don't want to crap on anybody's parade because there's enough of that going on. All the sports know-it-alls, by the way, spend enough time talking about what the Leafs have to do to win. And then when they do win, because they did exactly pretty much what the paid observer said they have to do, these guys sit on the sidelines and try to find every way to suggest that was somehow a fluke, right? They got the break. They didn't get the call. They got the call. Whatever. They have won in dramatic fashion twice and a blowout the third time. If it were the other way around, we'd be bemoaning the fact that they coughed up a lead, etc., and that they lost the game. That whoever the opponent was, and it has been many who have seen the Leafs, up and then take that win away from them over the course of a game. Well, then, the Bruins or the Lightning or whoever, they bore down and they worked hard and they did all these things and they came to life and they blah, 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 blah. I guarantee you do not hear that same commentary among the Leafs press gallery, particularly the talk radio guys, right? They'll find it. Well, was that the Lightning actually slowing down the mighty offensive juggernaut that is the Toronto Maple Leafs? Or was it really the Leafs solving Vasilevsky, the all-star Hall of Fame, future Hall of Fame goaltender, right? They got to find that narrative. Just enjoy it. Just enjoy it. So here we go. If you're not a Leaf fan, apologies, but that's kind of where we were all over the place. All right. So a couple of notes. Tomorrow, we're going to talk to Melanie Doan. And you might recall a couple of years ago, she runs a music school for kids. And the cool thing about it was, this was around pandemic time. So 2 or 3 years ago. And Jan Arden got involved in a project at the school, and they recorded this. You got to have a little kindness, the Glenn Campbell song. And it was really cool. Video, everything else. Well, this year they've got a new song, and they're doing it with Molly Johnson. So we're going to talk to them all about that and where to go. And I think, there's been just such a need to get together to do this sort of thing. As I said, I was at an event last night, and like most annual events, they were all saying it's the first time in 3 years that we've seen each other in person, not doing things remotely, not doing things over Zoom or whatever the medium might be. So tomorrow we're going to have a chat with Melanie and talk about the successes and the importance of, kids and music matter. That every kid is a musician. Every one of them. And it doesn't matter if they sing on key to your ear. They're singing on key to their ear. They are dancing to their own rhythm. They've got it figured out. Seriously. I'm convinced that everybody is a musician. Everybody can sing. How many people in your life say, "Oh, I'm no singer"? Yeah, you are. You are. You were given that gift when you were a kid. And at some point, you or somebody around you told you you're tone deaf. Or you became self-conscious. Or whatever it might be. And we in a broader way, we drive that out of our kids. We drive that enthusiasm and passion and creativity and no-holds-barred confidence out of them in so many ways. So I just think it's an important conversation to have and, get the kids involved in music, whether it's banging the tambourines. James is coming to visit, and he loves to spend time in the studio down here. And he plucks all the guitars and the ukuleles and the piano and everything else and makes a hell of a racket, but loves doing it. His mom and dad are both exceptional musicians. Mom plays the fiddle. Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's quite good. And his dad is accomplished as a guitarist, pianist, a bassist. So there's lots of music in their lives. And he just loves it. Way you go. Piper and Marigold, same thing. So tomorrow, your kids and their music. So that'll be fun. And on Thursday, as promised, it's going to be feed drop day. So we'll give you a few headlines of things that are going on. But if you're just joining us, we are into starting our third year here at Story Studio Network. Our second anniversary was last Thursday. Aaron was on the show. You should drop in. If you missed that episode, pick it up. Because, just to hear kind of the backstory and Aaron's enthusiasm for what we're doing here and the importance of new media, not just based on the podcasting that we're doing. New media. And, I think we need to reinvigorate our journalism. So that is her mission. So drop in on the last Thursday edition of Now and Next. But we talked about the first show that we launched, and it was called The Next Normal. Right in the maw of the pandemic. And it sounds ominous, but it was intended to look at where we are in the context at that point of the pandemic. What are the lessons? What are the observations that we can make to say, this is the problem we face because we didn't do that 5 years ago. But more to the point, what lesson are we taking away from this and how can we build back better? So we're going to drop that series over the coming weeks and revisit it. And it's worth listening to. It's The Next Normal. Now, if you want to preempt that, you can find it wherever you listen to your podcasts and check it out right now. You can binge it all by yourself. But for those of you who are regular Now and Next listeners and you just want the easy flow, we are going to provide that to you over the coming weeks. So Thursday will be feed drop day, and we will feature Now and Next with Ujwal R. Kulgood, Dave Hardy, Lisa Taylor, and Sarah Thorne rounds out our roundtable of hosts and co-producers on the show. All right, let's get to the news of the day south of the border. So this morning at about 6 a.m. Eastern Time, Joe Biden released this video, and this is his announcement. He's going to run again in 2024.
Freedom, personal freedom, is fundamental to who we are as Americans.
There's nothing more important, nothing more sacred.
That's been the work of my first term, to fight for our democracy.
This shouldn't be a red or blue issue.
To protect our rights, to make sure that everyone in this country is treated equally and that everyone is given a fair shot at making it. But around the country, MAGA extremists are lining up to take on those bedrock freedoms, cutting Social Security that you paid for your entire life while cutting taxes for the very wealthy, dictating what health care decisions women can make, banning books, and telling people who they can love, all while making it more difficult for you to be able to vote. When I ran for president 4 years ago, I said we're in a battle for the soul of America, and we still are. The question we're facing is whether in the years ahead we have more freedom or less freedom, more rights or fewer. I know what I want the answer to be, and I think you do too. This is not a time to be complacent. That's why I'm running for re-election. Because I know America. I know we're good and decent people. I know we're still a country that believes in honesty and respect and treating each other with dignity. That we're a nation where we give hate no safe harbor. We believe that everyone is equal, that everyone should be given a fair shot to succeed in this country.
Thank you for choosing us.
Every generation of Americans has faced a moment when they have to defend democracy. Stand up for our personal freedom. Stand up for the right to vote and our civil rights. And this is our moment.
We, the people, will not decide. A proud moment.
So if you're with me, go to joebiden.com and sign up. Let's finish this job. I know we can. Because this is the United States of America. There's nothing, simply nothing we cannot do if we do it together.
And David Schultz is with us from Hamline University in Minnesota. And I saw watching the scoreboards last night. I'm just kind of still feeling the effects of this crazy Leaf win last night. And for the, I mentioned already this morning that we have a real we're triggered by a 4-1 lead with 10 minutes to go in a playoff game here because we blew it against the Bruins so many years ago. Tampa did the same thing last night. The Leafs are moving on to Game 5 with the chance of closing it out. So if I sound a little sluggish, David, it's too many nights of overtime hockey. But I was watching the scoreboard, and your Rangers are hanging in there 2-2 against the Devils.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. There's a lot of sleepless nights during the playoffs now because I'm also cheering for the fact that the New York Knicks are on the verge of winning also too. So a lot of time being wasted watching sports right now.
Yeah. Well, you know what? We could be doing worse. I just think we could
be doing worse. You're right.
Absolutely. And of course, Minnesota, the Timberwolves are in there, the Wild are in there. So you guys got lots to cheer for in your part of the world.
We do.
I wanted to talk about the Supreme Court, the status of the U.S. Supreme Court, but of course we can't not start our conversation this morning with the 6 a.m. Eastern Time announcement by Joe Biden that he is ready to go. He's going to run again in 2024. And the first thing that comes out immediately is that he's going to be 82 years old on Inauguration Day, whether he's the president or not. And if he were win the presidency, of course, he would be the oldest one to be sworn in as president. And even the same thing if Trump were to win. They were talking about him being 78. So all these numbers are thrown around. And I'm going to throw a number at you or a question for you. And I know it's unfair because I haven't given you the chance to research this. Any idea what the life expectancy of an American was in 1876?
I am going to guess in 1876, it was probably somewhere around the age of 40. Am I close?
You are. It was 39.4.
Okay.
Right? So Biden would be like twice the age of anybody who was considered, living on a dream when the country was founded. So to talk about ageism and all of these things around this, I think just to put that into context, if the president of the day was 40 years old, he was living on borrowed time.
Right. Absolutely correct. Now I thought you were going to give me a different statistic. And the statistic, one of them would be 70%. And 70% is what public opinion polls are saying, that about 70% of the American public is saying they do not want to see Joe Biden run again, in terms of overall, whether it's concerns about age or a whole bunch of different things. And then there's another number, I think it's somewhere around 60%, but it depends on the day you ask the question. And 60% is the percentage of the U.S. population that does not want to see Biden versus Trump in terms of an election again. But the reality is, unless something really changes, what are we going to probably see in 2024? A rematch of Biden versus Trump. What we'll have is, and I'm not against older people, but we'll have the two oldest presidential candidates ever in American history, as far as I know. And we have two people who, for a variety of reasons, generate an incredible amount of dislike or distrust. One of my students said this really well a few weeks ago, and he said something to the effect of 435 House members, 100 senators, 50 governors, 500 CEOs from Fortune 500 companies. And he said, good God, can't we find two other people to run for president for the United States than these two people? And that sort of captures American public opinion right now, is that they are not by any means the first choices for 60 to 70% of the American public. But nonetheless, that's the likely matchup in 2024.
Well, the other number that gets thrown around, too, is that it's sort of 50-50, even among Democrats who do not want Joe Biden at the top of the ticket.
Yeah.
So this is going to be one for the history books, for sure, on so many levels. But I wonder whether or not we need to have this resolved. We need the Ali versus Foreman rematch just to settle the debate.
And it's possible we do at this point. I mean, what's interesting is the fact that Trump has never won a majority of the public opinion. You remember in 2016, he loses the popular vote, wins the electoral vote. Same thing. Well, actually, I should say in 2020, loses the popular and the electoral vote. But if you look at 2018, he's not on the ballot officially, but it's a midterm election, a referendum on the president. He does really badly. He does not garner a majority of the support of the American public, but because of the structure of the Electoral College, he's a competitive candidate, at the national presidential level. And I just say all this because he's got a whole bunch of reasons: pride, facing potential lawsuits, business reasons why he wants to be president again. But part of it is exactly as you said here. This is Ali, Fraser. I don't know. I'm not sure if this is Rumble in the Jungle or whatever. I'm trying to think of whatever the names of the fights were way back then. But this is round two again.
Yeah, and I think it's, one of the things that for those of us who...
Thriller in Manila, that's what I was thinking.
There you are, Thriller.
Okay, yeah.
That's it. For those of us who are down in the weeds on all of this is good popcorn fodder, and it's good to watch. But when I listen to, and it's a highly produced announcement, and it's an interesting comparison because Trump in a room with people in the room, it was a live event. He played off the crowd. It was a relatively, for Trump, a subdued announcement when he made his. Biden's was very highly produced. It was released via video at 6 a.m. on a scheduled, and making the comment, but very pushing a whole lot of emotional buttons in the almost opposite way that Trump pushes emotional buttons. And the language that he is using is very important. That is to say, Biden, just as the language that Trump uses is really important. You could not have a more stark comparison between these two men in terms of what the choices are for president in the United States than I can't think of a more extreme comparison.
I think you're right. I mean, the only other comparison that I can think of recently was Clinton versus Trump in 2016, where their styles, their mannerisms were very different. I did a study with one of my students, and we looked at Clinton's speeches versus Trump's speeches in terms of the types of words being used. Trump's speeches were all full of monosyllabic or single-syllable words. They had a lot of emotional language. Senator or Secretary Clinton, I should say, many polysyllabic words, very complex sentences, very legalistic. They appealed to very different aspects of people. It's almost in a sense in which Trump was going for the fear, the emotion, Clinton going for the brain. And in some sense, Biden and Trump are doing the exact same thing, appealing to different parts of our sensibilities, using different types of language, and you're right, scripting in very different ways. Now, part of what I think is also going on with Biden is that, remember, he's also done very few press conferences, and I think there's a sense in which his staff is, let us say, protecting him. And I can't think of any other words but to say that. Much in the same way that back when Reagan was president, we now know that his last couple of years, it was the early onset of Alzheimer's. You hear these rumors out there, and you look at the mannerisms of Biden, and there's a lot of chatter out there. A lot of chatter out there regarding, whether or not, because of his age, is he up to it or something. And you look at a production like this, and it makes you wonder, was this being done on a purpose also as a way of choreographing the president?
So that the interesting thing is that when you talk about the comparison with Clinton versus Biden versus Trump and Biden are actually on the same lane. I mean, they're going the same direction. They're using different language, maybe going at different speeds, but they're both manipulating the fear factor more so, I think, than, to your point, than Clinton did versus Trump. Very much so. Right. It's almost this is an existential election for the United States if you listen to Joe Biden.
I think the same thing for Donald Trump at this point is that you hear him talk and say, we're on the wrong course again. We're in the worst shape we've ever been, et cetera, et cetera. No, I think for the two of them, although I think there are people who are more enthusiastic for Trump than there are enthusiastic for Biden, the vast majority of their two campaigns is the fear factor, is that in many ways, the best thing that Joe Biden has going for him are two things. First, it's a Republican House of Representatives that he gets to run against, and he gets to run against Donald Trump, which should motivate a lot of voters to come out because he can say, maybe not quite, even if you don't like me, look at the other person. And that's going to be a motivator. And he also gets to run against the House of Representatives and say, look at all these things I wanted to do, but I couldn't do because of those dirty, rotten Republicans. So he's got the fear factor, the negative factor really helping him, even though there is not a lot of enthusiasm for him. The other thing I was going to throw in here, when Biden got the nomination, 3 years ago, there were a lot of us, including me, and we might have even talked about this at some previous point. I always thought Biden was a one-term transitional president, that he'd get elected, and it would then transition to his vice president, Kamala Harris, whoever, to sort of carry on. None of us ever thought he was a two-termer. Again, the transitional being, and that's what's so interesting now is that it's moved from the transitional to where the Democrats don't like him, but they don't really have anybody who's jumping up and saying, this is the alternative.
Well, it would be suicide for them to do that too, right? I mean, at this point, you dance with the one who brung you sort of thing, and otherwise, the last thing they need is a whole bunch of turmoil within the party to try and unseat a seated president.
Well, you're absolutely correct. And so at this point, think about what's going to probably happen next year. Assuming all the polls stay the way they are, Trump has expanded his lead over DeSantis. And DeSantis is actually fading at this point. Nikki Haley probably is still what? Barely. She's a half an asterisk. Tim Scott, half an asterisk. Mike Pence, probably the same thing. The primaries next year are going to be boring. It's going to be pretty much Trump and Biden just march straight through it. And from a media perspective, there's probably not going to be a lot of surprises going through there. And that's bad in a way because what you hope that the primaries do is vet candidates. They become better debaters. They hone their issues, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think, and I don't think we're going to see that. Both sides are going to talk to their base, and they're not going to talk to one another for a long time.
Have you ever seen that there when you've got sort of two presumptive candidates just running the table well before the convention, to the point where, on day one of the primaries opening, there's really no competition on either side?
The closest that we might get back to this might be 1956. Eisenhower's running for re-election, and Adlai Stevenson takes him on for a second time. That's probably the closest that we have. So that's going to take us back nearly 70 years ago in terms of it. So let us say, since the modern primary system, which is essentially the 1970s, we've never had a system like that, where it's basically been an encore of what we saw 4 years before.
Before you go, and the reason that I actually reached out and wanted you to come on the show today, I wanted your perspective on what's going on with the Supreme Court, particularly all the story around Clarence Thomas, and maybe in a larger way, the integrity of the courts within this context of a divided country. I realize that it's fun to watch the political popcorn popping over here, but this slow boil, as far as the Supreme Court is going on, again, just a casual observer from the other side of the border, but it looks to me like there's more of an opportunity for historic institutional change here, depending on how this all plays out. Congress has asked, the Chief Justice to come and testify before regarding ethics and the Clarence Thomas questions around him not disclosing some of the money, his income properly, et cetera, gifts that he'd received. There's a whole swirl going on here that more or less is in your bailiwick. I'm just wondering, on a scale of 1 to 10, it's easy to point to the history of around this presidential election. This to me seems fairly significant. And again, like I say, a low, slow boil that, media's sort of paying attention to it. It's salacious because, Clarence Thomas got a great vacation from a donor. Right. And that's the headline. It gets lost in there. We begin to lose trust in the integrity of the Supreme Court, no matter what your political stripe is. I think that's a serious issue that we're not talking about.
Yeah, that is a bigger issue here, is that what we saw is that historically, let's say for the last 30, 40, 50 years, that even though trust in Congress or trust in the president was pretty low, we were seeing way above 50% in terms of trust and faith in the Supreme Court. Last year, before the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade and abortion, it was fading, going down. After that decision, it is now trust in the Supreme Court is less than 40%. And if you think about it, the same thing's going to be true in Canada. Courts can only do their job if they're viewed as impartial, if they're trusted, if people feel like the judges are not acting like politicians with robes. And now American public opinion clearly has reached a different conclusion. The last time we saw, again, any kind of crisis like this was in the 1930s. When I teach my law school students, I talk about what's called the first New Deal cases and the second New Deal cases. Franklin Roosevelt gets elected. They pass a lot of legislation. The Supreme Court strikes it all down and says, you can't do this kind of stuff. He gets reelected in 1936, threatens the court with a packing plan to basically change it, and the court eventually changes course. But there was a crisis back then. And the crisis, I think, right now is trust, but it's also the fact that the current court is out of step with public opinion. Now, I understand you have to look out for minority views. But when you look at polls, the vast majority of public opinion disagreed with the Dobbs opinion. The court has taken positions on guns, on money and politics that are vastly out of sync with American public opinion. This is not a recipe for good institutional performance. And when you get individuals like Clarence Thomas and Justice Alito, who at best have a tin ear for the perception issue, you're right. This is the last remaining institution in America, government institution, that has not faced a crisis, that is now facing a crisis.
Yeah, it was almost like no matter what you considered in terms of the political leaning one way or the other, the Supreme Court was, I think, from my perspective, viewed as the adult in the room. I mean, we were going to go to mom and dad to figure this one out. We're not quite sure there's the foundational issue is questionable now. So where do we go with this? I mean, is there an ethics path that kind of straightens this out? Does the Congress have any sway or way over having Justice Roberts, testify at some level around the ethics and the standards, or what is it we should and can expect of the justices on the court?
Well, first off, let's say Congress were to pass ethics legislation for disclosure. It's not clear that this Supreme Court would rule that that's constitutional, which basically means they get to police themselves, although that's a real problem there. But second, the normal check would be if you really thought that there was a problem. Take us back to the 1960s. Abe Fortas had to step down from the Supreme Court because of some allegations of a financial impropriety. Public opinion used to pressure people off. Clarence Thomas is not going to leave. I hate to say this, he's going to leave in a pine box. He's not going to voluntarily leave on his own. With the Republicans controlling the House of Representatives, there's no chance to impeach him, because that would be the other option too, is to say maybe you vote to remove a justice or something. So the check, because of the polarization, the partisanship right now, and because of where Thomas identifies, you don't have the viable checks and balances in place to rein in the court at this point. And this is a court with a 6-3 conservative majority that doesn't seem like it's willing to rein itself in, which is what you used to hope, that the court would kind of say, we could do this, but we're not going to. So I don't see a short-term path out, which is why I think, again, the 2024 election, I think, is going to be tremendously important, because given the age of some of the justices, we've talked about the age of the presidential candidates, but the justices are some of them are getting pretty old too at this point. I could see the next president appointing at least a couple of justices, and that could have that might fix the problem, but I don't know.
Well, now to hear you describe it that way, the whole phrase checks and balances becomes less valuable than a bumper sticker.
Absolutely correct. It's one of those things you teach in grade school and say, we got a nice system of separation of powers, checks and balances, but it doesn't really work in theory. It doesn't really work in practice.
Yeah, well, Clarence Thomas thought checks was spelled with a Q as opposed to a CK. So
yeah.
David Schultz, it's always good to talk to you. I know you're off to Europe to teach, so safe travels, and we'll want to hear all about it when you're back on this part of the planet.
Excellent. Good. I'll have lots to report.
Very good.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
Now and Next is produced by Becky Coles. Our production manager is Jamie Nickerson. Audio editors are Mike Trutler and Drew Garner. And our sonic logo designer is Greg McDonald. Our executive producers are Dave and Aaron Trafford.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.